Hello, Bill. I'd like to ask you what you're interested in talking about today.
Well, unsurprisingly, I'm interested in what's happening to the economy, and there's actually been a lot of movement. The Fed met and released their plans going forward, and I'm going to talk about that. There was an interesting move in the Senate where they voted on Trump's tariffs, and Trump is continuing his war on the agricultural sector, the irony of which is amazing since most of that sector supported him. And then there's the arch that he's planning on building, and he took a big step forward in that development by firing everybody in the committee that's responsible for building projects in D.C. And it turns out there's an imaginary drug war in Venezuela that we found out about compliments of my favorite senator, Rand Paul.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to get farther to the right and more conservative than Rand Paul. So when he comes out and disagrees with you and doesn't support your policy, he's got pretty good conservative credentials. And if he thinks you're doing something terribly wrong and stupid and says so publicly, I think that's a big deal.
And very true.
Yep. So, Glenda, what are you going to talk about today?
Well, as your media maven, I became very interested, as I said last week, in this YouTube ad placed by Israel that showed lots and lots of food available in a market in Gaza and said, look, there's lots of food. And then there were complaints filed against that ad. And Google said, well, it doesn't violate our standards. I got really interested in that, so I decided to pull up the rock and see what was under it.
Now, does Google make their standards public? I mean, can you pull down, look and see what they
Yeah,
have?
there's two ways to answer that. One is it's on the web page. The other is it's different in the contracts. And that's what I'm going to talk about today.
Interesting.
And also, I thought we should at least give a nod in the direction of the Canadian ads that poked the Tiger's cage at the World Series.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. And its response has been really interesting.
I think it's just a special moment in American history and also in media history. But sober us up. Talk about the economy.
Oh, well, this is my favorite thing to talk about, and it works really well with my antidepressants. The Fed met again, and they decreased the interest rate by 25 basis points. And this is the interest rate on overnight borrowing between banks. It's called the federal funds rate. This was widely expected. Powell, in his presentation of this to the business press, said that, this had been quite controversial, and further rate cuts in December were far from a foregone conclusion. Despite Wrecking Ball Trump's pressure to decrease rates dramatically, there were only two dissenting views on the board to this quarter-point decrease. Now, what's interesting about this is one of Trump's appointees wanted a 0.5% cut, which is more in line with what Trump hopes for. But the other dissenting member wanted no cut at all.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, basically the Trump backing contingent on the board lost one vote from last time. Ironically, I love this, one of the reasons that they cited was the lack of data available on the weakening job market and the impact of tariffs on inflation because of the turmoil at the Bureau of Labor Statistics created by Trump's firing of its director, and additionally fueled by the government shutdown, which further delayed the release of collection and collation of the vital data the Fed needed, as well as the vital data that businesses, banks, states, and municipalities need to make investments, hiring, and spending decisions. The irony is that Trump inherited an economy that was growing, increasing employment with declining inflation, and managed to completely turn it around into an uncertain, volatile, job-killing, inflation-growing shit show we have today.
Well, he's a very, very magical deal maker. Now, let me ask you one. I have to ask this question every week. Is there a director for the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
No.
Oh, not yet.
There's a vacancy. Anyone understanding statistics need not apply. Yeah. The Fed has paused its drawdown of its balance sheet. And of course, loyalists, you have no idea what this means. The balance sheet of the Fed consists of its liabilities, namely treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities purchased during the great financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. Now, what does this mean? $5 billion in treasury bonds matured this month, which happens every month.
Okay.
The Fed must either give that money, the principal, back to the holders of the bonds, which would reduce the national debt, but it ironically is the elimination of $5 billion in safe assets held by the public as part of the national wealth, thereby decreasing it. Ordinarily, they would just sell $5 billion in new bonds to make sure the ever short supply of safe bonds in the bond market would increase, or at least stay the same. That would keep the national assets and wealth the same.
Right. I think I'm following you.
Which exactly is what they're going to do this month. Thank goodness.
Okay.
All right. Additionally, during the great financial crisis, they bought a bunch of crappy mortgage-backed securities, and they paid far too much money to the private institutions, investment companies, and banks, while letting regular folks lose their homes in the great financial crisis. Well, some of these mature each month. Oddly, the Fed made a lot of money on these crapola bonds, which they bought at greatly inflated prices, because it turns out that even though some of the mortgages in these bonds defaulted, they still made money for the obvious reason that the great majority of people pay their home mortgages rather than joining the homeless in Portland and elsewhere.
I see. So.
What a shock, right?
Okay, so even though this was a crappy investment, nonetheless, the people who had to pay those mortgages kept paying them.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. What happens with a bond is they have a certain interest payment they have to make, and they have a hard time if one of the mortgages defaults because somebody hasn't paid.
Yeah.
So eventually they can't pay the interest rate they promised because of the housing market, and then the bond goes into default. That doesn't mean the other people stop paying their mortgages and it's income to that bond.
Okay, so this is the great bailout.
Right.
Right. Okay, so to bail out and make sure the banks didn't fail.
Well, that's the thing. What you have to keep in mind is that the Fed is the lender of last resort. Its job is to protect the financial system and banking system from collapsing. That's what they do, and that is an important function. The interesting thing is we don't do anything like that for the labor market or the homeowners, right?
Exactly.
There's no bailout mechanism that's automatic that we put in place to bail out them.
Okay, so for the bailout to work, they had to purchase those crappy bonds that were the reason the banks were in the process of going under.
Right. The issue was these bonds' value because you could sell them to no one because of the defaults. So essentially the price of the bond is zero.
Yeah.
But the Fed paid full price for the bonds.
So I get it.
Right.
Okay.
And that bailed out that fixed the balance sheet of the banks and investment companies. They spanked Lehman Brothers and put them out of business to show that they could do it.
Yeah.
And then they proceeded to bail out everyone else. And that's what the lender of last resort is supposed to do. They either bail out the banks or they take them over. Those are the two options.
Okay,
or liquidate them when they take them over.
So the people at the far end of this disaster, they thought, well, we've got some property, we're going to pay it off.
Yeah.
No matter what this larger collapse is.
Well, when you take out a mortgage and they put it into a bond, they break the mortgage up into tranches. You have no idea who's holding that tranche of your mortgage.
That's right.
And in fact, I don't think anybody else does either. Once they make these bonds, I think they're pretty hard to unwind. So people just kept paying their mortgages. That was their obligation.
Okay.
That's the contract they signed, and that money's accruing to those bondholders. In this case, it turns out even paying these inflated prices, the bond, which had their balance sheet exploded because they took on all these bonds and had to pay for them to save the banks, turned out to be quite profitable at the price, even at the price they paid.
Okay, so the Treasury is doing okie dokie with that.
The Fed is doing.
The Fed is doing okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So here's they're intending to let $35 billion worth of these crappy bonds mature, and thus give the money back to the original investors who created the crisis in the first place. The good news is they have never achieved this goal before and are unlikely to do so now. Here's the peculiar thing. Since the Fed is the investor now who holds a bond, letting them mature means not selling new bonds to replace them, which in this case would have to be federal treasury bonds, which would increase the safe assets in the economy. Instead, the Fed will pay itself $35 billion, money which it creates by the stroke of a computer key, to essentially alter its books to make it look as if it has less debt obligations. Yes, this is a relatively pointless exercise, which does not enhance the well-being of any actor in the economy materially, but makes accountants and others who don't understand where money actually comes from, which is just about everybody, happy. So it is probably a good thing that they will fail.
So they just moved it from column debt to column asset and said, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I took the wrong degree.
Yeah, so the people who are doing this. All right, the bonds are income-earning assets. They were in default, which made them a liability.
Right.
Getting them off your books is a good thing from an accounting perspective. But the fact of the matter is the Fed just says, okay, we'll buy them back. Here's $35 billion. And they erase the bonds and they issue new treasury bonds, which are safer than these bonds anyway. And they're matured. It's not like they're going to give them back to the banks and say, make more mortgages. I mean, it's an accounting technique here.
Okay.
So the Fed has been doing a lot of nothing in the last month, and they're admitting to it, right? I mean, it's like they don't have the data. They're fearful that, the labor market is still soft, and we do have some evidence that the practice that firms were engaging in was no hiring but no layoffs has ended. All right, so we're beginning to see layoffs as well as no hiring. And that would be a further indication that we're heading into a recession, because people who are laid off take a hit in their income. They don't spend as much. Aggregate demand goes down. That means, firms are making stuff that they can't sell anymore. So that's part of the downward spiral. It's so much fun being an economist these days. Now, as it turns out, the Senate decided to take a stand on Trump's tariffs. This was safe because the Speaker refuses to reconvene the House of Representatives. But in any case, the Senate voted against Trump's tariffs against Brazil, some of which were imposed by Trump because of Brazil's temerity to prosecute their former fascist president for fomenting a coup. Again, demonstrating that the Republicans do not understand either irony or corruption. And then the Senate similarly voted against tariffs imposed upon Canada, partially occasioned because they aired a Ronald Reagan speech against tariffs, apparently during a baseball game. This, in turn, inspired the media to fact-check and air portions of that speech, thus verifying that the Canadians had accurately represented Reagan's views. So that kind of backfired.
Well, especially since Trump said that they had edited it and it wasn't true. But, we were alive during Ronald Reagan's presidency. We knew who he was economically.
Right.
Even when he was in his right mind.
So what this means is when the House of Representatives, if they ever reconvene, a similar motion could be entered and voted on. Right? The Democrats will need some help to force a vote on this.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, all they have to do is have the vote, right? Because the tariffs have to be passed by both houses of Congress to become tariffs. Both houses of Congress have to vote to approve the tariffs.
Right.
If the House comes back into session and votes to affirm the tariffs, it doesn't matter because the Senate has voted no.
Okay.
So nothing this House can do can now make these tariffs legal. But that, as long as the House is not in session, that vote can't take place. Okay, so should the House ever reconvene and a similar motion be entered and voted on, the tariffs would be illegal regardless of how the House votes, since Congress has the constitutional authority to set tariffs, not the president. No doubt King Trump will try to keep the House out of session until 2029. That will be difficult. Our poor Trump voters in the agricultural sector.
Oh, yes, we've been playing violins for them all week.
Well, they've had a really hard time. Yeah. Okay, so back to our agriculture watch. Because of the tariffs placed on China, they dramatically cut, in fact, eliminated their purchases of soybeans from the United States.
Exactly.
So that's in the background, and the soybean farmers are, upset because they have a lot of soybeans and no place to sell
them. A bumper crop. They have a bumper crop.
So this is not what they were planning for in their financial portfolios. In addition, Trump instituted a cash swap with Argentina and between Argentina and the U.S. And this is a swap of currencies. We give them $20 billion of our currencies. They proceed to give us $20 billion.
Okay, I wondered what the press is just calling this a bailout, but that doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. The U.S. swaps $20 billion. This is a cash swap that we're talking about with Argentina. And this means we take the same amount of our currency and trade it for the same amount of their currency at some time, date in the past. So it's supposed to be, we're just taking Argentinian currency and they're taking U.S. currency. The problem is the value of the Argentinian currency has collapsed. So this is like a $20 billion.
Well, I was going to say, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, actually, it's not as uncommon as you might think, because the idea here is that this would stimulate the Argentinian economy and the value of their currency would go back up.
Okay.
Now, why did Trump do this? Because they have a bankrupt right-wing regime on the verge of collapse in Argentina. And so as soon as Trump imposed those tariffs on China, causing China to look elsewhere, Argentina promptly dropped their export tax on soybeans to make them extremely attractive to China, who bought them.
Of course China.
Okay?
Yes.
So we have a lot of U.S. soybean producers holding on to a lot of soybeans.
Yes.
So expect a lot more tofu and soy sauce in the restaurants and food stores at bargain prices, right? So the price of soybeans in the United States is essentially zero because they were expected to export those, and the market here is flooded with soybeans, and price goes down.
But as a result of meeting with Xi Jinping in China, China said it's going to now import soybeans to the level that it imported it before.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's right. I forgot to say, according to Trump.
Yes.
Okay.
Who, every time he goes in the room with a foreign leader, declares victory. So we'll wait and see what they actually buy. I mean, they use a lot of soy sauce and tofu in China. So maybe they're going to have a big party or something.
And there was a plan to give money to soybean farmers, but they couldn't make that happen fast enough because the government's closed.
Yes, the refusal of the House of Representatives to come into session and vote against Medicaid, Medicare, and Affordable Care Act premiums again has managed to shut down Congress, and then thus Congress cannot pass a bailout. I don't know. Trump may know some billionaire who'd like to buy a lot of soybeans or bail out the agricultural sector, but this is not policy. This is nonsense, right? And it gets worse.
Okay.
So, at the same time, Trump made a deal to import Argentinian beef into the U.S., thereby enraging cattle ranchers in the U.S. It seems the Trump voters in the agricultural sector were, for some unknown reason, shocked that Trump would so systematically attack the agricultural sector by doing exactly what he said he would do.
Yes.
Even Republicans in Congress are feigning outrage at the systematic destruction of the agricultural sector, despite the fact they refuse to use their constitutional authority to control tariff policy, thereby tacitly supporting this idiotic tariff policy and its consequences. They helped cause this. A fact that should be pointed out to voters in every subsequent election for at least the next 6 years for every member of Congress standing for re-election.
Well, okay, but I have a counter narrative frame for you.
Oh, good.
And that is that we're looking at kabuki. That the farmers who, and I'm sure some of them are very genuine when they tear up about their soybeans, that they were bailed out last time, so they assume they're going to be bailed out this time. That the reason they voted for him again was they knew what a tariff war is. They went through it before. But they also knew that they'd get bailed out. But you have to create a kind of publicity campaign to legitimize that. On the other hand, there's on social media platforms a lot of FAFO to the farmers. You voted for this guy, you're getting exact. Why should we bail you out when we're not going to be able to? The SNAP program's about to end. Children aren't going to be able to get food. Why should we bail you out? Why are you so special? So there's a pushback against it. Let me say it that way.
You want to have some more fun with irony?
Oh, yes, because, irony is the only way we're getting through this.
The SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps,
yes,
is not part of the welfare system. It is funded by the Department of Agriculture, and it provides income to low-income families to buy food.
Yes, from farmers, yes.
This is not a welfare program for the public. It's a welfare program for agriculture that's going down as well because they won't vote on a budget. And the prices on the Affordable Care Act by income level are astonishing.
Yeah.
Some people are going to have a 13% increase in their health insurance payment, and these are people on limited incomes.
Yes.
A $13,000 increase in your annual medical insurance payment is over $1,000 a month for people on fixed incomes.
Well, I understand that, and the unwillingness of the Republicans to take that hit is breathtaking. They do think, though, at least one bigot who was interviewed, who's a representative from someplace in Arkansas, said that he just thought that unemployed young men in the inner cities should go out and get a job. That's what, this medical insurance is covering, these lazy lots. Well, gosh, that's really forward thinking for 1956.
Let's do the irony again. If you're that desperately poor in the United States, you're on Medicaid. The people who are getting their insurance through the Affordable Care Act are the working poor and near-retirement seniors whose incomes are inadequate. All of these people are working.
Yes, and the other thing, more irony, the people across the southern states take a higher percentage of the payments for Medicaid and other things that keep people alive, which I'm totally in favor of, than the northern blue states do. And so they're making it clear they don't care about the next election, and that's what worries me.
Yeah, it's really interesting that when you look at the redistribution of funds from the federal government collects funds from the blue states and gives it to the red
exactly.
states. That's true in education, in welfare, and so this is a huge income subsidy for the red states. And they keep voting to get rid of it and then complaining when it happens.
Yeah.
It's very peculiar. But then, there is not a part of the media that does explain this. They just think that this is manna from heaven that they earned when they get their subsidy, but whoever else is getting a subsidy is somehow malfeasant or cheating
That's
or
right.
doing something wrong to get it. And oddly enough, this is even rampant in the blue states among the people who receive the aid.
Well, I do understand that they don't understand what socialism for farmers means, but that's pretty much what these subsidies amount to, especially for products that they grow that we don't eat it.
Yeah, there's a big difference between the family farm and commercial agriculture on a large scale. And that's all about, some use in the United States and export. We produce a tremendous amount of food. A lot of the grain that we subsidize gets fed to cattle that we subsidize. We have had socialism in agriculture since the end of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
It has never changed. Bill Clinton cut all those agricultural programs at the request of a Republican Congress, knowing full well that it would cause a near depression in agriculture. And then when the next president, George W. Bush, the conservative Republican, was in, his very first act was to restore all those agricultural subsidies that the Republican Congress had wanted cut. They wanted the free market. Well, they got to see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? We produce a lot of food, and without subsidies, the price of most of these commercial agricultural crops drops to zero because we produce so much of it.
And then they're out of business.
And we can't let that happen. The guys at Cargill, where are they going to get their next Ferrari from,
Yeah, I know. It's so sad. Well, then there was another little piece of irony, too, that's really tragic, though.
Yes. Senator Rand Paul, in a speech yesterday, pointed out that there is no fentanyl produced or delivered to the U.S. by Venezuela. Also, the boats, which Trump is having the military blow up, killing their occupants, would require refueling 20 or more times to reach the United States. So these boats cannot have fentanyl in them, and they cannot get to the United States. So besides murdering people and getting cool videos for social media, Trump's actions in the Caribbean have not stopped any drugs from anywhere, and just possibly have made sports fishing in the Caribbean much more dangerous than it had been previously.
Well, I wouldn't charter. I'll tell you.
No kidding. And it gets dumber still. Okay, Trump's imaginary triumphal arch that he wants to build in D.C. took a big step forward yesterday because he fired everyone on the federal committee with the responsibility for such building projects in Washington, D.C. The good news for Trump's successor is that this will create jobs when they pay to get this and his ballroom torn down. No doubt there is no doubt that these self-aggrandizing boondoggles will be as successful as the current beautiful wall that adorns the entire U.S.-Mexico border, a project that has been, for U.S. citizens, as beneficial and successful as Trump's casino development projects.
Yes, well, he really knew how to build a casino, because when they blew it up, it came right down. There's no difficulty with that.
There is no limit to his magical thinking.
Yeah.
This ballroom is an abomination. I don't care that they tore down the East Wing and wanted to do something else, but what they're doing with it is horrifying.
Yeah.
And in bad taste, as you would expect.
Well, that's what I think. It's in bad taste.
And who is this triumphal arch going to be dedicated to? I mean...
Well, I think we know who he thinks it's going to be dedicated to, but remember the military parade he insisted upon having where the tanks went by that were squeaking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the economy's headed in no good direction. The Fed is blindfolded by the actions at the BLS and the failure of the federal government to be functioning to collect the data they make to make any interest rate determination. And as a consequence, they're likely to get more conservative until they get more information.
Yeah.
So everything Trump is doing, he's engaged in activities that frustrate his own purpose. And this is consistent with somebody who thinks by force of will they can change the world.
Yeah. Oh. And that goes back to magical thinking, but, that's who this guy is and his minions.
So, what have you been working on in the last day or so?
Well, I did a deep dive into something I talked about last week. And that was, I mentioned seeing a YouTube video report showing a market in Gaza bursting with fresh produce.
Well, that's great.
Isn't that great news? And it was shown in the context, though, of a complaint filed against Google, which owns YouTube, as an example of misinformation, which, let's just call it propaganda, from Israel. So 2 reporters, Carolyn O'Donovan and Joyce Soyun Lee, for the Washington Post, wrote an article on October 15th about this. So right after I saw it, they wrote the article. I don't think there's a cause and effect. So the video was posted between August 24th and 29th with the text, "There is food in Gaza. Any other claim is a lie." And it was sponsored by the Israeli government. It was translated into 3 languages, but shown in, I think, 6 different countries. It was viewed more than 7 million times. And it was posted 2 days after the UN-backed Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, which is the Global Hunger Monitor, reported a rapidly spreading famine in Gaza City.
Wow.
Yes. So Washington Post reporters found that several of the clips were from earlier markets and that they were taken by Palestinian photojournalist Majdi Fathi to show that the amount of available food was too expensive for most Palestinians to afford, and that apart from the food he took pictures of, there was no other food in the market.
So this was basically a commercial.
Yeah, and a total lie. And also they stole somebody else's footage, which...
To use it for their purpose.
For their purpose. So complaints to Google came from a number of different governments, according to a Google employee who spoke on condition of anonymity. Now, the specific complaint sent to Google's Trust and Safety Team, I love that name, came from the Polish State Research Agency, NASK. I guess we'd say that, NASK, claiming that this ad and related ads about the availability of food included manipulated and false information and violated the community standards for YouTube.
Well, good for them.
Yes. Google policy prohibits ads that, and this is on their website, quote, deceive users by excluding relevant product information or providing misleading information, close quote. So it looks like an open and shut case, right?
Yep.
But the Trust and Safety Team determined that the videos do not break Google's rules, banning ads that show, quote, dangerous or derogatory content, shocking content, sensitive events, and unreliable claims, close quote. Even though the claim is completely unreliable, Google employees were advised that any future video ads from Israel making, quote, similar claims about food, famine, or humanitarian aid in Gaza are, quote, not in scope of those policies and are not violations, close quote.
Whoa.
So what is that about? Israel's budgeted $45 million for YouTube ads, and it posted this particular ad and other ads that were misleading about the availability of food in Gaza City on both X and Meta. So I got curious about that.
Yeah, why does Google bother at all? I mean, what would constitute misleading content? And
Well, precisely. So you have to take a deep dive or look under the rock, which I did.
ooh, there's always nasty things.
There are, yes. It's not pleasant under there. In 2021, Google and Amazon signed a $1.2 billion contract with the Israeli government to provide it with cloud computing and AI services. Now, the details were kept under wraps, but The Guardian, God bless them, obtained leaked Israeli Finance Ministry documents as well as other sources.
Uh-oh.
And this is what Google agreed to. Well, Google and Amazon agreed to. Israel demanded that Google and Amazon agree not to prohibit their use of Google and Amazon's products, even if that use violates the terms of service from Google and Amazon. In other words, Google and Amazon relinquished control over how their product was going to be used. Now, I think this probably has to do with the intention on the part of Israel to use the AI cloud capacities for taking action against Palestinian occupied territories. And I'll talk more about the surveillance implications in a minute. Israel also demanded that companies secretly notify Israel if a foreign court orders them to hand over data stored in their cloud platforms, as is required in both the United States and European unions. So what you have to do here is think about the International Court of Justice, right, which recently heard concerns about genocide and starving people in Gaza. Well, if the International Court of Justice requested the information stored by Israel in the Google/Amazon cloud for the purpose of pursuing a court case, they are obligated by law to provide that information and not to tell their client that it's been requested. But they gave that up when they made this contract with Israel. Israel demanded that the companies, the platform companies, Google and Amazon, secretly notify Israel if a foreign court ordered them to hand over data stored on their cloud platforms. In other words, to break the law. So the Amazon and Google agreed to what has been called a winking mechanism. And that meant that these two companies agreed to send the Israeli government, quote unquote, money. Okay, these are, as far as I can tell, fake transfers.
Mm-hmm.
But they would list that they were transferring money to the Israeli government. And the way that they set up the code is with the dialing codes of the requesting nations. In other words, if a court request was coming from the United States, the money request would begin with 1, and they would be requesting 4 figures. That's the way the code worked. Isn't that clever? I bet you they sat up all night thinking that one up. They also agreed that they would send Israel these winking codes within 24 hours of the receiving a request for data about Israel from the courts.
There's a principle in law that if you write an illegal contract, it's not binding.
Okay.
So this contract violates U.S. and European
Law,
Union law.
yes.
It's an illegal contract, and Google and Amazon are not obliged. In fact, they are prohibited from acting on the basis of that contract.
Well, but they...
I think Bezos could afford a really nice prison cell.
Well, one of the commentators I heard talking about this, and of course there's a lot of wistful thinking going on, is that ultimately Amazon and Google could be accused of participating in genocide. And the reason is that the AI component allows Israel to use sophisticated facial recognition software. The data storage capabilities allow the military to quickly monitor phone calls and other communication it uses to develop targets in Gaza. And we do know that prior to signing this contract, Israel had developed a software program called Lavender, which allowed it to use facial recognition to target Palestinians. And next time I'll talk about the implications of this for the bombing of Gaza. But for right now, this increased the capacity of the Israeli military to do exactly that at the time that war broke out.
Well, this is appalling. And this is about a payment of $1.2 billion, apparently, that Israel paid these companies for this capacity. This certainly makes them complicit in the use of that material by Israel. I don't think there's any way around that.
Well, according to reliable sources, a commander in Israel's Army Center of Computing and Information Systems stated that the AI cloud services had given Israel, quote, very significant operational effectiveness in the Gaza Strip. And that is a euphemism for targeting. This has been repeated by other military officials, so it's like an open secret. The capability of the data storage and AI. The winking messages was broken just recently by The Guardian. So what in fact happened, as you just pointed out, Amazon and Google agreed to subordinate their own terms of service to Israel's demands, despite it being against the law. And Google employees who saw that this is what was going on, they've staged protests against being asked to participate in what they see as genocide, and they've been fired for speaking out. So it's not right. It's not good.
Well, this is appalling. Another week of appalling news. We are getting to the point where anything that isn't nonsensical is corrupt.
Well, that's an interesting way of saying it.
Yeah, I mean, most of the policy by Trump is nonsensical when it isn't a payoff for something.
Yeah.
And it seems that Google and Amazon, who infiltrate all aspects of our lives,
Yes.
inevitably, their terms of service, their statements about protecting data, everything they've said in their terms of service is just a lie in the service of their making more money, and they don't care what people do with us.
Well, that's why when you asked initially, can we find the Google guidelines or the Amazon guidelines? Yeah, you can find them. They're on their webpage.
Well, apparently not the real guidelines.
Exactly. And, the amount of money for the contract in some ways is just chump change. And evidently part of what was behind it was hoping to piggyback on successfully selling this capability to Israel, to other sovereign nations, which they have done. The UK has purchased AI and data storage from these companies. It's proliferating. And of course, our own Pentagon has contracted for this same kind of service. So we have no idea what the real arrangements. Thank God for investigative reporting.
The other implications of this are that at this very moment, we have so many devices logged on that they can monitor that we might want to move to a bunker.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. They could figure out where we were
Yeah.
or are at any given moment of the
Phones,
day.
our computers.
Yeah.
Well, on that happy note,
Well-
I mean, this is terrifying.
Well, I thought I would end with a happy clappy note
Oh, thank you.
because, it's hard for both of us to do all this,
I know.
diving into what's going on behind the news. Well, okay, so the World Series, Canada and the U.S., right? And so you mentioned that at the World Series, Canada put up this ad that, on the Jumbotron that had Ronald Reagan saying, tariffs are a terrible idea. Okay. And because Trump is a 2-year-old, he decided to increase the tariffs on Canada and end the trade talks, right? And I guess when he was in China, he wouldn't talk to the Canadian Prime Minister, even though they sat across from each other at the banquet table. He's just a 2-year-old. So, I think I'm being unfair to 2-year-olds. So I saw this really interesting online platform. It's a podcast that had a discussion with its listeners about what they thought about the ad. And these were Canadians who were responding. I thought it was so interesting because a number of the commentators said, well, you're not going to get anywhere with the MAGA supporters by, mocking them. You just, you can't make inroads into their mentality. And our goal as Canada should be to educate them.
A hopeless enterprise,
Well,
if there ever was one.
I just thought, well, isn't that sweet that they...
It is. It is actually a very generous view of our actions. And the problem with the Trump voter and his supporters is that they have bought into the magic.
Yeah.
So a reasoned argument goes nowhere because the expectation is that the magic, it's just a matter of time and it will work out in the desired way. And this is our culture right now and our media. It just encourages this simplistic kind of looking at problems, and so that there's, one policy lever to change, or let's get rid of this organization and it solves a problem. There is not a single government agency that was ever created unless there were a pile of dead bodies.
Well, that's the problem, that these agencies were created for a reason.
Yeah.
The other commentary that people made, and then it was supported by other people who agreed, was that Americans MAGA would just see this as an attempt by Canada to interfere with American politics, and that wasn't a good idea either. Now, there were some Canadians who said they thought it was great. They had no problem with it. But I was really interested, first of all, in the low heat of the commentary. Mm-hmm. There's not any viciousness. There was no inflammatory rhetoric coming from the people who watched this. It was very carefully reasoned out. How would the audience receive this? I was very impressed. And then there was this other ad that really put me on the floor. When you say, we're here to educate people. That was the whole point behind the ad. Because it's the Doug Ford, who's the premier for Ontario. And he did this very clever ad with Newsom, where it's like a split screen. And he's saying to Newsom, well, the World Series is between basically Ontario and San Francisco. So if you win, we'll give you personally some Canadian maple syrup in a tin can as it's meant to be. Now, it may cost me a little extra to bring it into the United States, and I just cracked up, and so did the podcaster, because if he's educating us, he's not paying the tariff. It's the importer who's paying. It's me. It's the tax that I'm paying.
Yeah.
And then Newsom is also on the split screen. He says, okay, well, if I win, I've got a very wonderful bottle of California Sauvignon. Could you put it on a shelf in a liquor store? And Ford says, not a chance. And that's going up on the Jumbotron. So they're not stopping their interest in making people pay a little attention to what's going on between Canada and the United States. But I would say it's not only a more tempered approach this time, but it's also ridiculously inaccurate. So I don't know what we're supposed to say about that.
Bread and circuses.
Yeah, that's right.
Bread and
Spectacle.
circuses.
Which reminds me, in his tour through Asia, the South Korean gave him a golden crown.
That would be too good.
No, he did. He gave him a golden crown that's like 3 feet, 2.5 feet tall. I don't know. It's probably it's a reproduction of some ancient artifact. But what is that exactly? Is that an attempt at total and complete flattery? Or is it total and complete parody?
Well, I think my guess would be it's the latter, because they knew he wouldn't get it. And then he announces it's okay for them to build a nuclear-powered submarine.
Exactly. That's what happened. And then the other thing that they served at the state dinner was mini hamburgers with ketchup.
Yeah, that's what I go to Korea for, hamburgers.
So Stephen Colbert said, in other words, they were crowning him the Burger King. Let's just leave it with the Burger King and the Jumbotron ads by essentially two governors, one in Canada, one in the United States, really kind of trying to make a little parody out of what's going on.
And we all need to go out and vote next week.
Yes, which reminds me, I should say, aren't you going to be somewhere in Eastern Europe next week?
Yes, I'm doing a workshop on institutional economics at the University of Cebu, which is in the city of Cebu, which is in Transylvania, within sight of Vlad the Impaler's castle. So we're going to do our little workshop, and then all these economists are going to retire to the castle for a group trip. Should be a lot of fun.
That ought to be uplifting, to go from Donald Trump blowing up ships for no apparent reason to Vlad the Impaler. Maybe put our history in some kind of context.
Yes, and I have packed a suitcase, an extra suitcase to take. Half of it is full of wooden stakes, and the other half is full of garlic. Should be a great trip.
And be wonderful. So,
and if I come back and only want to do this podcast at night, you'll know things went awry.
I will understand perfectly. So will we be on hiatus next week?
Yeah, I'll be back the following week, and we can pick up there with stories about vampires.
Yes, so you people are on your own for a week?
Yeah.
But please do come back.
And, if I end up in Cebu and they suck the life out of me, it'll be pretty much what's going on to the whole population of the United States anyway, so I don't feel like it'll be a big change.
If you come back soulless, you'll just be joining the rest of us.
And on that happy note once again.
Okay, we're going to say bye-bye for now. We'll send our voices to you a week after next.
Thank you, loyal listeners.